Hey guys! Tonight we will explore the queen so cruel that her skin turned to charcoal before she died. She is Mary Tudor, who ordered hundreds to be burned at the stake without shedding a single tear, only for her own body to later decay into blackened, coal-like skin. You won't survive the sound of living flesh moaning or the flames licking at her skin in that cold royal chamber. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Please leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your local area. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step through the heavy door into the solemn sick room of the palace, where flickering candlelight dances across stout stone walls. The air here was once hushed and reverent, but now it's torn apart by a thick stench of decay like thousands of carcasses rotting at once. You, the court's most esteemed physician, have witnessed countless lives slip away, yet never faced a malady so monstrous. The queen's skin has turned from rosy to coal-black patches, peeling away like burnt charcoal, while her abdomen balloons grotesquely, as though harboring a phantom child that will never arrive. For the first time, you feel your medical knowledge crumble before an unnamed phenomenon. In your hands lie the most precious medical tomes, yet not a single page describes living flesh, hemorrhaging and rotting. No remedy, no folk cure exists with details precise enough to halt living tissue's decay. The queen whispers mournful lullabies to invisible children within her womb, each soft murmur a summons for her flesh to dissolve. You glance down at the ornate velvet bed, its once shimmering golden threads now stained black by oozing ichor. You reel in shock, realizing you are not merely treating disease but witnessing a soul poisoned by hate and despair. This is Mary Tudor, later known to history as Bloody Mary, but first she was a princess of uniquely fraught destiny, the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. Born into the turbulent Tudor dynasty, Mary's fate was sealed at birth. Her father yearned for a son to inherit the crown, only to be handed a daughter, forever shadowed by suspicion. Unlike the ruthless, unyielding monarch she would become, young Mary was strictly educated, politically astute before her years, yet always under the court's watchful Stiefling gaze. Those early honours swiftly faded beneath one calamity after another. Mary watched her mother kneel before priests, relics, and prayers in desperate hope for a male heir. She witnessed one royal infant after another breathe their last in tiny coffins. The wails of a stillborn brother echoed through the palace halls. In those moments, the spectre of loss and rumours of Mary's curse engraved themselves on the child's soul. Empty cradles, unworn christening gowns, and whispered consolations sowed seeds of deep resentment. Now, as queen, Mary's inner scars have never healed. Year upon year, bitterness, political intrigue, and crushing loneliness coalesced into a dark force. The grotesque necrosis of her flesh is the most violent manifestation of that spiritual affliction. A once steadfast will shattered, a longing for acceptance reduced to ashes. She believes herself pregnant, convinced that a child will restore her honor and station. The same mournful lullabies she sang as a princess now reverberate through her sick room. A curse upon the father who turned his back on her. As royal physician, you cannot look away from the tragic tableau. Candlelight filters through velvet drapes, illuminating sworn vines beneath darkened flesh. Every surgical incision, every herbal tincture fails to stem the necrosis. Blistered skin peels like charred bark, littering the wooden floor and driving you to seek answers beyond medical texts. That fetid odor is not merely rotting flesh, it is the desperate plea of a queen who once wielded life and death over others. In the hushed gloom, her raspy breaths toll like a death knell, pushing you to the brink of panic. You recall daring surgeries that saved noble lives, Nights spent tending feverish princes, yet now your skills feel impotent. Your heart clenches as Mary utters her final lullabies, begging her phantom child's return and forgiveness for sins not yet committed. You realize this is more than a medical ordeal. It is a confrontation with spiritual tragedy. Closing the ancient medical codex on your table, you survey the oppressive atmosphere. The palace, once a symbol of glory, has become a vault of dark secrets. Courtly potions strewn across the room yield no relief. And you wonder, is there a cure for a soul wounded to its core? Is there a remedy strong enough to heal a heart? Not just flesh? Before you lies a medical tragedy at the crossroads of science and the supernatural. Each diagnosis draws you deeper into the abyss of royal history. You understand now that to combat this malignant affliction, you must turn back time to the celebrated princess who was later cast aside, to her shattered convictions, and to the fate bestowed on Henry's daughter. This healing journey is not simply a physician's mandate, but a mission to fathom the heart of a queen synonymous with cruelty and betrayal. With compassion laced with dread, you draw a steady breath, preparing to embark on an odyssey through Mary Tudor's body and soul. You know that even if you halt her physical decay, a spirit poisoned by a bloody past may yet consume her from within. And perhaps, before this journey ends, you must confront the ultimate question: how do you save the soul of someone who once set so many alight? The sick room door closes softly behind you. The scent of herbs mingles with decay, and darkness deepens. You place a hand over your chest, staking your medical honor on the task before you, to heal a queen whose crimes and suffering are inseparable. And this tale of medical tragedy, a fusion of death and duty, has only just begun. The sick room door closed behind you like the final echo of your own heart, sealing away a chapter of tragedy, only for the cold air to part and reveal the next act of blood-soaked history. In that moment, Mary Tudor's heart, the heart of the unwanted princess, cracked open at the very instant her name was first spoken. Not with the joyous welcome she deserved, but with harsh whispers of disappointment and the curse laid upon her. Imagine the bustling palace at Greenwich on that day. A leaden sky that seemed to foretell a spiritual storm. Church bells ringing in jubilation. Drums and trumpets blending with cheers across the city. Yet Mary felt none of that celebration. In the birthing chamber, the trembling glow of candlelight seemed fragile before the court's icy indifference. Banquets were prepared, goblets filled with wine, and pavilions erected along every street, yet Mary herself, newly formed and fragile, was merely the excuse for Henry VIII's hushed lament. A daughter, another disappointment. Her father's words cut through the chamber like a dagger to newborn Mary's chest. If it's a daughter, perhaps a son will follow. This was no tender reassurance, but a sweetly venomous taunt, imprinting in the infant's mind that she was only a test version on the quest for a male heir. Around the palace, servants exchanged furtive glances before hurrying off into shadowed corridors, as though afraid to meet the innocent gaze of the heartbroken princess. The scene grew even colder when Mary glanced down at her pristine white cradle, every stitch in its fabric, every ornate carving in its wood. They bore the memory of children long gone. Time itself seemed to pause, and the ghosts of 6 lost siblings hovered around each bassinet and unused christening garment. The whispered rumors of a death curse were no longer fanciful superstition, but a psychological scourge lashing Mary's spirit. You are the cause of the king's failures. You carry the deaths of your brothers within you. At that instant, Mary, her eyes clear, as a child's etched loneliness deep into her heart. She lost not only a warm father's love, but also the companionship of peers within the court. Her siblings, who never even cried at birth, were yet mourned in hushed funeral rites, leaving only sombre graves as their legacy. Mary grew up amid distant wails and the stifling solemnity of the court, haunted by the notion that she was born not for joy, but as a flicker of hope her father could not hold. Mary's psyche then resembled an abandoned garden, where seeds of resentment and anxiety sprouted in the transitional air. She knew nothing of pure happiness, only a shudder when she heard other children laugh. A reminder of the one thing she lacked: unconditional love. Before she could even speak, Mary learned to cross her small hands in formal obeisance under the court's watchful eye. Like a porcelain doll on the verge of shattering at the slightest misstep. Gradually, that loneliness sank to her very bones. Mary withdrew into herself like a timid creature hiding from harsh sunlight. To her, the palace no longer gleamed as a grand castle, but twisted into a labyrinth of darkness, where gossip, rumor, and scrutinizing stares lurked around every turn. Sometimes she would press her tiny hand against the lacquered lid of a royal child's coffin, stealing away to the funeral halls, and wonder aloud, "Does that coffin wait for me every day?" In her heart there lay a shocking paradox. She craved love like any little princess, yet feared that love would always be fleeting. She sought fragile comfort in books and prayers, but even the most devout supplications echoed unanswered through the hush. Doubt and despair whirled into a storm inside her that no tearful rain could ever quell. Over time, Mary realized she had to forge her own armor. The psyche of a lonely princess hardened into an impenetrable shell, showing no pain, even as her heart bled. She practiced a forced smile, bowed to visiting dignitaries, and shrugged off gossip as though to say, "No matter how the world spins, I will stand firm." Yet inside her, silent tears collected, soaking into her pillow like droplets of rain in the still night. Outside the palace, the world reflected Mary's state of mind. The once lush Tudor rose garden stood now withered, its petals drifting down like fallen children. The east wind sighed through bare branches like ancestral wails. Mary watched in silence, feeling each cold gust cut across her skin like a blade, a reminder of wounds that would never heal. Her childhood held no space for true friendship. Girls her own age kept their distance, wary of the cursed princess. Mary learned to choose her words with care, trusting no one but herself. This defensive mindset became habitual, shaping her into a woman with a stony heart and reluctance to open up. Yet from the depths of that crushing loneliness, Mary discovered a hunger for power. Realizing she must protect herself, she nurtured an ambition. If she could not be loved, she would be feared. From the image of a rejected child, Mary evolved into someone determined to control her destiny, refusing to remain a victim. Her early tears became the wellspring of her drive, transforming disappointment into determination. Beneath the vulnerable exterior lay a steel will so formidable that even Mary herself occasionally feared what lay hidden in the depths. Now, looking back on that uncanny birthday, Mary no longer felt victimized. Her pain had forged her into a complex being both fragile and formidable. She came to understand that her greatest enemy was not any political rival but her own soul. Once cloaked in the shadow of curses and loss, her journey from disappointed princess to notorious queen would be a struggle between loneliness and ambition, between a scarred heart and an imperative to assert herself. Thus began Mary Tudor's tragic origin. She was not only the unwanted child, but both victim and architect of her own fate, a figure in whose life shadows and power mingled, destined for the greatest sorrow of all. Following the solitude and ambition, quietly taking root in Mary's heart, her childhood became even more haunted by shadows of loss and mourning. Mary's earliest days were not filled with lullabies or laughter in rose gardens, but with heart-rending cries echoing endlessly through the palace. Her brother's cradle still rocked with those final breaths, each tiny rise and fall a silent drip whispering a cruel reminder. Here, only departure endures. The once immaculate white cradle, draped in fine cloth, now retained the scent of camphor oil and fresh tears, mute witnesses to the tragic cycle both before and after Mary's birth. The palace, once ablaze with candlelight and grand feasts, transformed into a labyrinth of heavy black mourning drapes. Those curtains, hanging thick at every window, swayed in the breeze like death's own wings, brushing Mary's face whenever she toddled along the corridor. Through the gaps, The dim light flickered as though breathing the sorrow of fallen princes, causing the little girl to curl beneath her blanket. Wondering, how many spirits wander beyond this door? The nurses who cared for Mary, hands still stained with tears for the princes before her, could not hide their pity as they placed her in the cradle. Every lullaby they sang wore the hue of tragedy, notes soaring in the oppressive gloom, then crashing into the silent depths of Mary's soul, offering not comfort but an invitation to fear. The child could no longer tell playful toys from omens of fate. Simple wooden dolls became secret boxes of curses. Each stuffed bear, a reminder of the final embrace, a royal child would never know. Meanwhile, Mary's mother, Queen Catherine, moved half in a trance through endless rituals of supplication. Ancient icons and Spanish relics plastered the walls. Candlelight blurred through gilded glass. Catherine wore a hair shirt against her skin, fasted herself into exhaustion, and clung to the terror of losing her only surviving child, turning the palace into a funerary ground of the soul, where every breath weighed like a final prayer. Letters piled sky-high to Spain, precious gems, holy statues, even ancient bones revered as sacred, all displayed in one last desperate hope. Mary sat in a corner of her chamber, eyes fixed on the small saint's statue upon the dresser, silently praying that this lifeless idol would guard her fragile existence. But its cold, stone face never spoke, and she felt abandoned amid the storm of piety and power. The infant, unable to yet speak, had already learned a grim lesson. Love and faith were mere adornments for the throne, not lifelines for a little girl. The darkness beyond the palace walls bore the same tragic shape. Ancient trees wept bare branches that twisted in the wind like grey arms beckoning the prince's spirits home. The wind whistled along the long hallways, reminding Mary, "They have gone, and you may be next." A chill breeze slipped through the window crack, making her shiver, squeezing her small heart with nameless dread. Mary's psychology in those years was a web of contradictions, yearning for warmth, yet terrified of pain, craving companionship, yet too afraid to trust. She knew how to call out mother and father. But deep down, family was a distant concept woven from black mourning cloth and cold statues. Whenever sunlight filtered through the bars, casting pale patterns across the ashen floor, Mary felt exposed within her endless sorrow. In the hush, Mary's tears flowed like a gentle stream into the night, tracing sorrowful curves upon her cheeks, unaware that each drop etched memories of weakness and fear destined to forge future strength. She carried those silent scars, a testament to a child's unanswered cries in the void. The special care Mary received brought no comfort, only more ritual. Herbal doses, holy water, blessing ceremonies. Each potion tasted of bitter breaths of anguish. Each sip of holy water carried the scent of withered lilies. Mary swallowed them, as though ingesting someone else's despair, which turned to icy shivers down her spine. Those earliest memories lingered in Mary's mind like haunting still-life paintings, small yet composed. She listened to the ancient creak of funeral carriages and felt the cold stones beneath her feet. The palace became an endless wake, and Mary an uninvited guest at a sorrowful feast. Her tender ears recorded every distant toll of the morning trumpet and the sombre call of the 100-day funeral for the fleeting princes, overwriting the lullabies meant for her. Gradually, Mary learned to comfort herself. When the nurses looked away, she clutched her stuffed bear, the only gift untouched by solemn ceremony, and composed her own lullabies. Her shaky, private melodies held all her loneliness and longing for refuge. They were the only songs that did not shatter the palace's gloom, for they resounded solely within Mary's heart. Deep within, the harshness of her childhood kindled another fire, a fire of resolve. A child who had witnessed too much death vowed never to let tragedy define her. Mary's psyche began to shift. Fear of abandonment became a determination to protect herself. and bitter tears transformed into motivation for combat. Beneath the black mourning cloth, her small heart trained itself into steel armor, ready to face any storm and prevent the ghosts of the past from washing her away. And thus is the haunting of Mary Tudor's childhood. Every cry, every empty cradle, every lullaby carved into her psyche, forging a strange power that nurtured her wounds, even as it kindled her thirst for authority. Among the shadows of death, Mary learned not only to endure, but also to rise, ready to transform her first tears into the flame that would shape her destiny. The soft lullaby that had just soothed Mary in the night was abruptly replaced by another sound, the solemn toll of bells, the blast of trumpets, and measured footsteps echoing against cold stone. Before she could even quiet the fear lingering in the shadowed corridors of mourning, the 2-year-old was swept onto the ceremonial dais, no longer a child who cried or laughed, but a betrothed object in the palace's ruthless political calculus. To Mary's wide eyes, the scene unfolded like a gaudy, lifeless painting, the heavy silk garment weighing down her tiny shoulders, a glittering crown dazzling atop her still soft hair, and a golden ring far larger than her little finger. Bewildered, she nibbled on the ring as though it were a curious morsel, her eyes shimmering with curiosity even as dread flickered within. Is this a gift or a shackle? Below? The court watched intently, exchanging glances and murmurs, as if purchasing a prized warhorse at the royal stables, hardly acknowledging the living, tender heart within that fragile body. The sounds of the ritual, the Latin vows, the prayers of high lords, and the booming drums washed over Mary like a bitter winter rain. She heard each unfamiliar syllable, but understood none of their meaning, yet her heart already bore the imprint of her political value rather than a mother's love. Despite the grandeur of every word, they could not conceal the absurdity of binding a 2-year-old in allegiance to a throne. Mary wondered what was a game and what was a guarantee of her future. It did not end there. Rumors of further betrothals to the Holy Roman Emperor, the King of Poland, and princes of various Italian states swirled through the palace. In her first 6 months of life, Mary was married 6 times, a luxury item passed among the courts of Europe. She had no time to grasp the meaning of a wedding. All she knew was that her own body had become the crown prince's national treasure in her father's hands. Each marital contract served as a command in place of the affection any child ought to receive. In Mary's mind, the image of family was not a sanctuary, but a trading floor of power. Her mother, Queen Catherine, however deeply she cherished her only surviving daughter, was swept up in the whirlpool of nuptial bargains as though Mary were a necessary sacrifice. Catherine's whispered entreaties, "Swear the oath," echoed in Mary's ear, sowing confusion. Does mother see me as her child, or merely a bargaining chip? The little girl lifted her gaze to her mother's face, yearning for a simple smile, but found only distant eyes hiding anxieties about tomorrow. The palace rose gardens where Mary once delighted in chasing butterflies had transformed into the solemn stage of her wedding ceremony. Wilted flowers bowed in hushed conversation, and patches of sunlight gilding the leaves carried a note of sorrow, drifting across her silk gown as if to taunt. Where will you go? And with whom? The azure sky overhead offered no warmth, but concealed a cold wind blowing through Mary's life. In every sunbeam, she sensed not childhood wonder, but the weight of responsibility upon her small shoulders. Mary's young heart gradually closed itself, learning to refine her demeanor before the assembled court. She dared not part her lips in a smile, for such joy would only quicken her father's desire to bind her in yet another treaty. Instead, Mary practiced a low bow and gentle breath, striving to keep her silk gown free of creases. This strategic mindset formed early. Each gesture had to appear flawless, never betraying a single tear or a flicker of doubt, lest her political value be undermined. At 2 years old, Mary understood she was regarded as a strategic princess, a title quietly entwined with power ambitions. She began seeking refuge in memories of mourning, the sorrowful lullabies, and her worn-out teddy bear. These became her psychological shield, safeguarding her from calculating glances and cold negotiations. Whenever the bear's fur was damp with her tears, she taught herself to hum lullabies, transforming those tears into breaths of resolve. Under the pressure of alliance after alliance, Mary's yearning to control her own destiny sprang to life. She realized that if she could not alter the political plots of adults, she could at least master her own appearance, her expressions, and her gaze. She honed her powers of observation, reading the eyes of kings and ambassadors alike, knowing that her wedding attire was but a soft armor in the arena of courtly intrigue. That delicate psychology laid the foundation for her later, grander ambitions. Power first, affection only an accessory. Amidst the labyrinth of ceremony and personal aspiration, Mary learned to become an invulnerable princess, to carry the utmost value yet never show weakness. The repeated wedding rites scored themselves into her soul like branding irons. Be strong, be unyielding. She vowed that while marriage might bind her hands and feet, it could never bind her heart aflame with desire. And so began Mary Tudor's hasty political bindings from the age of 2. She was not merely a lost child among the ceremonial music, but the architect of her own strategic psyche, learning to conceal her vulnerabilities and nurture her ambitions, ready to transform each matrimonial shackle into a springboard for her future. In that small face, politics and survival instinct merged, laying the groundwork for an unprecedented saga of power and ambition, building on the nascent struggle already stirring in Mary's mind. Where the scent of incense and the distant roll of drums still lingered, the young princess's political standing grew as precarious as a frail leaf in a storm. As her mother, Catherine's only surviving child, Mary was wrapped in a mother's love, even as she became a hostage in the relentless bargaining of power. Every time Catherine knelt by flickering candlelight to say her prayers, consulting geomancers and physicians from across Europe in desperate hopes of a son, Mary felt her own small heart quietly bearing a burden no child should know. Beneath the palace's leaden sky, hundreds of silver bowls filled with holy water lined the corridors of power, silent witnesses to Catherine's fragile hope. Mary listened to each tiny drop echoing on the cold stone floor, like the soft sigh of an innocent soul crushed by invisible weight. Every glass basin, every intricate pattern etched into its rim, carried the unspoken message. She would matter only as a boy, as the longed-for heir apparent. That image branded itself on Mary's memory, so that whenever light danced on the water's surface, she saw her own reflection thin, alone, adrift amid the grown-ups' prayers. But it did not stop there. Obsessive campaigns of acupuncture and charms followed. The court physicians, cloaked in voluminous black robes, stuck slender needles into Catherine's emaciated flesh, and Mary watched her mother's body convulse from starvation. She remembered Catherine's gasped imploration to her attendants. "Keep my little one alive, you must." Words that echoed in Mary's mind whenever she dared step into the sunlit courtyard. Even daylight seemed shocked by the desperation of a royal family. At that time, the palace felt like a spiritual maze, its gilded dragons and phoenixes carved into the walls morphing into psychological weapons. Mary stared at the dim golden reliefs and imagined them weeping blood, as though her mother's grief had seeped into the very stone. This was no longer a place of protection, but an arena where hope and despair clashed like two fierce tides against her tiny heart. Mary's psyche took deeper wounds by the day. She curled into a corner of her chamber, afraid to look down the hallway, lined with shelves of state documents and ceremonial thrones, lest those symbols of power hurl at her the unspoken question, "How fragile are you?" Whenever the queen appeared in her magnificent robes, her face drawn and weary, Mary swallowed her tears, knowing that her grief would only fuel the courtiers' gossip. If only she had been a prince. Yet from that fragility, Mary honed her will. She observed her mother kneel and witnessed the tears sliding down Catherine's pale cheeks. Then told herself, "I must be stronger than her." Instead of bowing her head in sorrow, Mary clenched her small fist, peered through the heavy velvet drapes at the open sky above the courtyard, where stars sparkled undimmed by suffering. She resolved to cling to that light, her personal beacon of hope, never again relying on incantations or royal entreaties. Gradually, Mary grasped that her future balanced on the scales of politics, and that fact could not be altered. Instead of resentment, she chose to rise from her emotional scars. She carved out a private refuge among the empty seats of dignitaries, a single crimson velvet armchair in the royal library, where she withdrew whenever the palace grew too deafening. There, with eyes closed, Mary imagined a gentle river flowing through her distant homeland, granting herself a rare moment of peace. Mary's psychological journey in those years was defined by her dual longing for affection and the imperative to assert herself. She listened to the echo in her heart, vulnerability entwined with duty. The yearning for warmth mingled with anxiety. Each day, Mary wondered whether she could truly be Catherine's daughter and the rightful heir without being crushed beneath the world's expectations. That tension kept her from embracing any joy, fearful that happiness would vanish amid the court's dreams of a male successor. On a rare afternoon, Mary slipped into the royal rose garden as golden light filtered through dense branches. A gentle breeze carried the scent of gardenias and bay leaves, stirring the glossy foliage. She closed her eyes, letting the wind wash away the heaviness in her chest, and for the first time realized she was more than the court's delicate position. She was a human being with a right to personal happiness. Yet the candlelit throne in the palace reappeared the moment she opened her eyes, reminding her that responsibility would never let go. Mary remained there among the fading roses, resolved that her future would demand more resilience than anyone expected. She pictured herself walking through those morning corridors without fear, envisioning a day when no vow could dictate her worth. The brittle psychology of her childhood had transmuted into a fierce drive. She would use her own fortitude and intellect to free herself from the bonds of political hostagehood. That fragile status no longer bound her. It became the catalyst for her inner strength. Mary understood that rather than waiting on Catherine's miracles or her father's promises, she would transform herself into the one true source of value. In that final silence of dusk, amid the pale pink of sunset, Mary drew a deep breath, ready to embark on the path of forging power and securing an unshakable place in the history she was poised to write. That gentle afternoon light lingering in the rose garden seemed to vanish from Mary's mind, replaced by a cold wind, sweeping through the palace corridors, an omen that her fragile power was wavering. The days when she concealed herself among bookshelves and the crimson velvet armchair were over. Now Mary stepped into the spotlight as Princess of Wales, believing she had reached the pinnacle of royal favour. But the palace halls still tilted under her father's will, and before she could draw a breath of relief, her authority crumbled at once. The ancient walls reeled from the announcement. The court had officially revoked every right Mary possessed, erasing her title of Princess of Wales in an instant. Courtiers anticipated her posing beside the new queen. Yet in Mary's eyes there was only stunned silence. At 17, an age of broken dreams, she was shuffled onto the chessboard of power like a pawn. The once welcoming palace became a labyrinth of hostility, where each royal decree felt like a sharpened blade cutting into her tender flesh. The very next day, Mary was informed that everything she had been her rank, her privileges, her dignity was stripped away. She was no longer the king's daughter, but a wildling worthy of contempt. Sunlight streaming through the windows no longer glimmered, but burned harshly with mockery. You were once sovereign, now you are but a shadow in service. An empty hollow spread through her chest, urging her to bow her head. But no refuge remained, except the mouldy library shelves. Soon Mary was led to the jewel-strewn cradle of her half-sister, born only months earlier. There, Elizabeth, daughter of Anne Boleyn, was pampered like treasure. while Mary served as her attendant. Every step Mary took echoed on the cold marble floors. Each command approach, bow, pour tea, weighed upon her like a sentence. She was no longer a princess, only a servant. Mary's gaze filled with sorrow as she imagined the palace roof tiles tilting downward. As if to extinguish the last flicker of her hope, Elizabeth's chamber was draped in imperial splendor. Thousands of gold-embroidered silks hanging in solemn grandeur. But for Mary, it was an arena of humiliation. She had to bow before an infant, eat with the lower servants, scrub floors and clean chambers. Simple tasks of childhood became implements of disgrace, igniting rage in her veins. Whenever her silk skirt brushed fragments of spilled porridge, Mary's mind reeled. A princess reduced to waiting on a baby ignorant of statecraft? Anne Boleyn's orders hung over Mary like a weight. Should she dare resist, she would be slapped, beaten, or shoved by the servants who once would have died for her. The very hands that once poured tea for the princess now gripped leather whips, ready to administer the new queen's cruel punishments. Mary recalled the grand ceremonies when she was cherished by the court. Now only the snap of lashes echoed against the cold walls, matching the clatter of wooden sabots along the corridor. Outside, the scene mirrored her disgrace. Black velvet drapes drooped like funeral shrouds. Windows cast their somber panes before the gathering storm. The red glow of oil lamps spilled onto the tiled floor, staining it with the fresh wound of her humiliation. Mary stood alone in the room, staring at her reflection in a gilded mirror, a once authoritative young woman, now a weary figure whose gaunt shoulders bore the weight of profound shame. Each night, Mary would stealthily creep to the dusty library, running her fingers along the spines of history books in search of warmth in their pages. She wondered about the majestic princess portrayed in those volumes, imagining she might reclaim a scrap of that glory. But as the candle's flame flickered on her spine-shadowed form, Mary realized power no longer hid within those written words. It had been erased by someone with a pen. Mary's psyche became a storm of anger and despair. She felt her throat constrict with fury at her father, who disavowed his own daughter for a new love, and deep despair at the recognition that no one could rescue her but herself. This realization did not break her, but compelled her to rise. Mary tore the black velvet mourning cloth from her shoulders, clasped her small hands to her chest, and vowed, "I will not succumb. I must find my path forward." Day after day, Mary learned to swallow her tears, forcing herself to maintain a proud posture. In each bow, she refined her patience. In every dish she washed, she converted humiliation into the strength of her hands. Her once delicate heart now beat fiercely, the silent cry in her chest transforming into resolve. One day I will step out of this servant's role and stand equal to any other. The palace had become the harshest test of her spirit. Mary was no longer Princess of Wales. Yet her self-respect soared. She learned the power of a whispered declaration. "I am Mary Tudor, daughter of Henry VIII. And in her heart that phrase rang like a triumphant hymn, even as her lips remained sealed by courtly decree. Thus fell her power at 17, not by blade or blood, but by the weapon of the mind. Mary Tudor, once welcomed as treasure, was now exiled within her own home. Yet that moment of collapse sparked her inner resolve, a beginning of the journey to reclaim her birthright and script her own chapter in history. The night wind whistled again through the window frame, reminding Mary of the days that had just passed, days that not only blackened her authority, but also deepened her humiliation to the very core of her soul. The palace, once a warm home, had become an arena of shame, and Mary, formerly a high-born princess, was now a pawn of disgrace in the enemy's hand. Brutal edicts opened a cycle of both physical and psychological abuse. Whenever Mary dared only to bow her head before her sister, even the smallest gesture was met with ruthless punishment. Her rank was stripped away, her sumptuous robes taken, replaced by tattered, Worn garments, the symbol of her fallen power. Once precious gifts lay gathering dust on shelves. Reminders of the worth she once possessed, but which had now died with her royal status. One bleak afternoon, Mary heard frantic knocking at her door. A servant burst in, yanked off her deep crimson cloak, and handed her a coarse, threadbare tunic. Standing exposed before a silent crowd sent Mary's heart pounding, as if it would burst from her chest. The onlooker's eyes held not pity, but delight at seeing a once sovereign princess forced into servant's attire. Less than a day later, Mary was banished from the royal dining table, no longer allowed to sit with the court. She was left to eat stale bread and sip scant water, while others feasted sumptuously. When night fell, she huddled on a cold straw mat. The barren walls seemed to stifle even her breath, reminding her of the status she had lost. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's lavish chamber across the hall only magnified the contrast. Jeweled textiles and tinkling laughter made Mary's heart twist in anguish. As each day passed, Mary had to learn to stifle her deepest anger. Even before her body bore the marks of violence, her spirit was bleeding hour by hour. She was forbidden to weep aloud, for a single sob would feed the courtiers' gossip. If only she had been a prince. Mary allowed her tears only in secret, soaking into the cold straw beneath her, letting her memories be torn apart once more. Chronic headaches became an unwelcome companion. Whenever Mary lifted her head, the vaulted palace hall spun before her eyes, as if the room itself were turning. The pain twisted within her skull, reminding her that the torture came not just from without, but also from within, the stain of humiliation coursing through her veins. Menstrual irregularities, loss of appetite, and physical wasting descended upon her like warnings of a mind in ruin. Mary, once well-nourished, grew gaunt. Her ribs jutted beneath the thin folds of her ill-fitting dress. At each meal, she dared only a bite, fearing the sensation of fullness would tighten the tension in her heart even further. On sleepless nights, Mary blamed herself for not being strong enough to alter her fate. She asked her pillow, "Why must I endure this injustice?" But the pillow remained silent, reflecting only her pale face and glassy eyes. In that moment, Mary realized that the bitterest suffering was not public disgrace, but the lonely ache with no comfort. Mary's mind learned to hide its pain behind a facade of calm. She honed the art of serenity amidst the storm. No anger, no sorrow, only a thin smile to conceal her scars. That very stillness unnerved onlookers. In her eyes, no spark of hope remained, only an unfathomable abyss. 3 continuous years of endurance forged psychological wounds that could never heal. Mary no longer recognized her former self, the girl who delighted in flowers and birdsong. In her place stood a young woman with a steely gaze, ready to stifle any feeling to survive. Yet within that collapse, Mary revealed an uncanny will to survive. She learned to transform humiliation into salve for her resolve. Each deprivation became a step forward to preserve her belief in herself. Rather than collapse, Mary gathered her burning indignation into a driving force that propelled her onward. When she looked up at the sky beyond her window, Mary saw that even if she were cast to the depths, the stars would still shine. Gazing at those distant lights, she quietly vowed, "I will not let the darkness consume me." The fragile soul she once was hardened into determination. She would rise. She would fight. After 3 harrowing years, Mary came to understand the true nature of psychological violence. It not only humiliated the body but also destroyed one's sense of self-worth. Yet she also realized that only she could restore that worth. In her mind, Mary painted the image of herself breaking free from those chains of shame, embracing the light of freedom. The campaign of humiliation left deep scars, but it also inscribed in Mary's heart a powerful message. I was not born to be a slave. The princess whose psyche had been bent by cruelty now turned her suffering into a compass pointing toward her future. That inner strength would guide Mary for the rest of her life, becoming a beacon when she stepped out of the darkness. The thunder of Mary's heart erupted the moment news of Edward VI's death reached her ears, shattering the long-standing silence around her soul. The at-rest palace trembled as if tolling a death knell, heralding a seismic upheaval. The young king on his sickbed had altered his will, bequeathing the throne to Lady Jane Grey, her father's granddaughter. In that instant, two contradictory sounds echoed through Mary's mind. One, the howl of utter grief. The other, a flash of joyous hope. She, who had endured so many ignominies in silence, was finally entrusted with her birthright, yet forced now to face a fresh injustice. In the coffin-like gloom of her chamber, Mary sat motionless on a cold wooden chair, every pulse pounding beneath her skin. Candles shrank back from drafts creeping through the shuttered windows, casting dancing shadows on the walls as though the phantoms of her past still haunted her. But Mary no longer trembled. 20 years of suffering had ignited within her an unquenchable flame of liberation. She drew the proclamation from her bodice, her handwriting trembling yet resolute, a declaration of her lawful succession, summoning servants, nobles, and commoners alike to defend the throne. Morning light filtered through ashen clouds, dyeing the stone stairway, a rosy gold as if dawn itself heralded the fateful day. Mary strode down the silent corridor, each footfall a heartbeat of defiance. No longer bent in shame, she walked with regal composure, suffused with martial vigor. The oak-framed windows seemed to bow in her honor, as though casting off the long night that had held her captive. Arriving at Framlingham Castle, the battered walls greeted her as mute witnesses to generations of courtly turmoil. The gate swung open, country winds whistled through the battlements, but could not sway Mary's resolve. Standing on the stone steps, she raised her letter of inheritance above the assembled crowd, not in supplication, but to proclaim the truth. The crown belonged to the one born in full right, as destiny had ordained. In an instant, Mary's summons struck like lightning across a storm-laden sky, and the first few loyal faces broke into exultation. A soul wearied by 2 decades of endurance now burst forth in fierce conviction. From a handful of faithful servants, her ranks swelled rapidly: minor nobles, local leaders, even hidden garrisons converged. A psyche, long bruised by humiliation, now fed on a potent brew of justice and righteous indignation, strong enough to melt the hardest hearts of her sternest adversaries. In the days that followed, Mary watched as soldiers poured into Framlingham like a flood breaking its banks. Hooves thundered across the courtyard, and thousands of steel-tipped spears glinted in the sunlight. Mary felt the people's resolve pulsing around her, not for her wealth, but for her legitimate claim and for the compassion born of her long suffering. Every glance, every cry of "Queen Mary" was like a warm breeze across her skin, dispelling the chill of years spent in agony. Amid that surging sea of humanity, Mary seldom displayed wild emotion, for she knew true power lay not in fury, but in restraint, draping a scarlet mantle over her shoulders. She turned and addressed the throngs with steely resolve. "I am no lover of war, but I will defend my birthright with all my might." Her calm command deepened her allies' respect and unnerved her foes, who could not predict the next move of the once powerless girl. Mary's mindset underwent a profound transformation, from a passive victim to a visionary leader. She thought not only of arms and numbers, but of unity of spirit. To her servants and soldiers she declared, "Keep the flame of justice alive. Our future cannot be written by traitorous hands." Those words rang out like the drumbeats of a war march, inspiring the ranks to step forward. The sight of Mary astride a war-horse atop the curtain wall, her hair streaming, cloak billowing, was nearly mythical. But in her mind played another symphony. Memories of lonely nights, of lash scars on her skin, of funeral incense lingering in the air, all fused into the wellspring of her inner strength. Mary realized that only a deep understanding of herself and her past could guide others. As the army marched toward London, Mary vowed, "I will enter the city not with sword and spear, but with truth and the people's faith." She knew danger still lay ahead, but no longer harbored fear. The psyche, once trembling under disgrace, now stood as strong as iron, ready to confront any challenge. With each step through the green countryside, she gained more followers devoted to the cause of justice. Overcoming every obstacle, Mary and her forces arrived before London's gates, whose walls bore the patina of centuries. Some whispered, even demons trembled at her approach, not for her title, but for the indomitable fighting spirit she carried. Mary stood firm, bowing to the populace. Yet her eyes burned with a still unextinguished fire, the fire of liberation. And in that moment, Mary Tudor became the very symbol of revolt. A psyche once shattered now shone with luminous courage. No need for advanced weaponry, justice and years of pent-up outrage had been her greatest arms. As the city gates swung open, Mary rode into the roar of the masses, once a victim. Now the architect of England's destiny, the flame of freedom had kindled, and no force could ever extinguish that fervent longing. The morning sun filtered through the narrow slits of London's city walls, illuminating the stillness left after a long night of waiting. Mary stood upon the marble steps, feeling each warm ray wash over her sumptuous robes, as though to banish every dark memory, from Hunsdon House to Framlingham Castle. And now, at this very gate, in scarcely a week's time, she had seized the realm that once seemed forever beyond her grasp. Yet Mary did not smile in triumph. Her heart still beat with caution, for she knew the throne was not the end, but merely the beginning of a new, arduous journey. London's sky was a clear blue today, and a soft breeze stirred the clock tower above, setting fluttering banners into motion. Cheers and trumpet calls filled the air, mingling with the exhilarating rush of blood in Mary's veins. She closed her eyes for a moment, inhaling the mingled scents of incense and fresh earth, the unbloody taste of victory, the fragrance of justice blossoming at last. Echoes of her past rang in her mind, the crack of leather whips, the sting of rejection now gradually fading beneath the applause of the people. When Mary opened her eyes, the city gate itself seemed to incline in welcome. The breeze toyed with her deep red mantle in a gesture that was bold, yet unostentatious, befitting a queen reclaimed without a drop of blood. In Mary's mind, the image of her army's advance through those tranquil villages remained vivid. Loyal cavalry, villagers waving flags, nobles shifting from doubt to allegiance. Now they all stood here at her feet, awaiting her final proclamation. The transfer of power unfolded with unprecedented ease. The council of the prince, once the arbiter of royal fate, swiftly changed sides and issued the royal writ endorsing Mary. Not a single battle was fought. Not one drop of blood fell upon the ancient stones, only the tearing of official documents, the stamping of seals, and the whispered refrain of Queen Mary spreading throughout the chamber. Mary brushed aside the clamour, stepped forward to the ceremonial table, and lifted the small reliquary, the symbol of power that had been denied her for so many years. The palace's vaulted ceiling reflected the emerald glow of gemstones, and its gilded walls seemed to memorialize this historic moment. Mary looked upward, awash in the vast weight of responsibility. This was not merely the recovery of a crown, but the bearing of a nation's fractured destiny, torn by disputes, religion, and suffering. In that instant, her psyche brimmed with resolve. She would heal the wounds and rebuild her people's trust. The crowd encircling the gate erupted in continuous acclamation. Mary knew every eye was fixed upon her. Some wept, others clasped their companions' hands, and many placed hands over their hearts, as if to affirm, at last, justice prevails. Mary inclined her head in humble acknowledgement, but her smile held not only solemnity, but hoped that the shattered pieces of the past might be mended one by one. As she paraded through the square, the statues of former monarchs stood silent witness. They had once judged her, formed the backdrop to Mary's tragedy. Now their stony gazes seemed to smile upon her. A breeze rippled through the guard's armor, each clink like the drumbeats of a triumphal march. Mary sensed the city's transformation, from fear and suspicion to exhilaration and renewed spirit. In Mary's mind appeared the memory of Queen Catherine, spent in prayer, and Elizabeth, her sister who once tormented her, now reimagined as a partner in unity under one banner. Mary gave a quiet smile, understanding that her deepest desire was not only for the throne, but for reconciliation and shared progress. She would remember the past, but refuse to let it shackle her future steps. Entering Whitehall Palace on the scarlet carpet, Mary passed between two lines of sentries standing motionless, as if time itself had frozen. Each step resonated, then faded, creating its own rhythm. The rhythm of rebirth. The psyche of a princess once humiliated had fully transformed. She was no longer a victim, but a symbol of steadfast power and unyielding righteousness. The doors of the great hall swung open, candlelight flickering and the scent of sandalwood rich in the air. Mary advanced to the throne that awaited her. All eyes converged, every citizen's longing seeming to crystallize in this moment. Mary drew a deep breath, as though to engrave this instant in both body and spirit. A confident smile spread across her lips, her gaze shining with conviction. She approached the throne and, with deliberate grace, sat herself upon it. In Mary's heart swelled reverence not merely for the crown, but for the sacred duty of guiding her nation's fate. A storm had passed, but many challenges lay ahead. Mary understood that reclaiming her throne without bloodshed was only the prelude to a grander drama, restoring peace, stabilizing the polity, and healing a society rent by division. Yet in that very instant, Mary Tudor etched her name into history, a woman born into shame who, armed only with justice and the people's loyalty, had reclaimed her throne without shedding a single royal tear. The candlelight danced in her eyes like a liberation that would never fade, and Mary, her heart forged in cruelty and grief, was ready to write the next chapter of the Tudor dynasty. The cheers of victory still echoed throughout the great hall as Mary's hand touched the throne. But the air had barely settled when dire news struck like a gale. Thomas Wyatt, a lord of great ambition who opposed Mary's marriage to Philip II, was marching on London. The palace, which had just seen the restoration of its former glory, suddenly reeled under a night of conspiracy. Mary stood stunned at the window, watching the treetops howl in the wind, as if warning her heart of the danger closing in. Courtiers paniqued, whispering like scattered ants, as word came that Wyatt's forces had crossed the Thames and laid siege to the city gates. Many urged her to flee the palace and seek refuge at Windsor. The palace itself felt like a dusk-painted portrait, flickering candlelight, shadowy figures moving along the corridors, and the hurried clatter of footsteps echoing incessantly. Yet Mary did not waver. Her heart, tempered by the journey from humiliation to triumph, was ready to stand firm. When her entourage urged her into a carriage, Mary felt a surge of righteous anger and resolve course through her veins. She strode onto the grand balcony, where the wind whipped her scarlet silk cloak and tousled her ashen hair like a halo. Beneath the overcast sky, Mary raised the hand adorned with her wedding ring, the symbol of her vow to England. The sight stopped friends and foes alike in their tracks. "I am the wife of England," Mary proclaimed steadily, her words resonating through the palace. "I live and die for my people." Her voice was not thunderous, but like an underground spring bursting forth, flooding the hearts of all who heard. The crowd below, officers and commoners alike, seemed to awaken in that moment. Justice and honor do not lie in retreat, but in facing danger with courage. The wind from the square battered Mary, as if trying to strip warmth from her skin, but she stood unbowed. In her eyes, the rebels, Wyatt and his allies, now looked like beasts trapped in a net. The conspiracy's dark night shattered when the title, Wife of England, became the rallying banner. Dispersing the fog of doubt, once sceptical onlookers now clamoured in her support, turning Wyatt's uprising into a rout. Mary descended the steps, each footfall like a victory, drumbeat confirming her first triumph. At the city gate, a few Wyatt soldiers trembled and laid down their arms, while citizens chanted, "Queen Mary," like a cleansing breeze blowing away all signs of betrayal. The scene etched itself into Mary's soul. It was not the sword, but the power of belief that proved the strongest weapon. In that instant, Mary reminded herself, "I am not cowed, I rise by the force of truth." In her mind, 20 years of humiliation, the lashings and the unbearable loneliness, roiled like waves beneath a calm surface. But now those waves had become a tide of renewal, lifting her to the place she deserved. The court quickly stabilized, and Mary's supporters declared their loyalty. Mary noted every gaze fixed upon her. Gratitude, respect, even a hint of fear for the new queen. She understood that the enemy had not only lost the battlefield, but was defeated in the war of wills. Wyatt, once poised to assert power, was now a solitary spectre among the people. Mary's steps back into the great hall were met by courtiers lined up in greeting. Every look carried reverence. She seated herself upon the throne, candlelight dancing on the marble beneath her. Recalling the trials she had overcome, Mary closed her eyes, inhaling the chill of the night before and exhaling confidence for the days ahead. "I will not flinch before any conspiracy." Her mindset now was clear, having known humiliation, abuse, and dispossession. She would now safeguard faith and honor. Mary understood that true strength sprang not from authority alone, but from the ability to ignite that belief in her people. She thought of Elizabeth, her once hostile sister, and resolved, only unity endures. She would embrace reconciliation to heal their wounds together. Mary's early reign became a testament to the power of the Spirit. She issued pardons to those who had wavered, rekindling hope in a nation drained by discord. She deftly laid the groundwork for a stable government, one where there was no room for coercive plots, only for justice and reconciliation. In Mary's eyes, that was the true victory, the triumph within the hearts of her people, and thus was Mary Tudor's first great achievement, not on the battlefield, but in affirming her authority through a single speech, a decisive gesture, and a moment of mortal confrontation. Her heart, once battered by humiliation, now shone as a beacon guiding England's future. Mary had proven that to face down conspiracy, one needs not only swords, but unwavering will and unyielding faith. The applause of congratulations and the celebratory songs still rang in Mary's mind when, moments later, the pathway into Winchester Cathedral became as cold as the entrance to a graveyard. Mary, whose steps had grown sturdy through both humiliation and triumph, now wore her most resplendent gold-embroidered gown. Walking beside Philip II of Spain, the political husband she had hoped would offer warmth. Yet from the very first glance, Mary realized that the lavish attire could not conceal the silent chasm between their hearts. The church doors swung open to trumpet fanfares and banners fluttering as if heralding a new era. Beneath the jet-black stone vault, Mary grasped Philip's hand, the handshake symbolizing the alliance between England and Spain. Before the assembled throng, Philip bowed courteously, whispering polite pleasantries. But the instant his chaplain slipped away through the carved wooden door, he turned his back. His distant, icy gaze, making Mary feel like little more than an exhibit, not a partner. His halting English formed a barrier between them, each hesitant syllable seeming to underscore, "I do not belong to you. I'm..." Inside the wedding hall, candlelight danced across rosette-carved walls. Yet Mary saw none of that splendor. She smelled the faint sweetness of lilies mixed with the acrid odor of half-burned wax, like a half-formed hope melting away. Philip's Spanish aides whispered that his demeanor was rather restrained, a polite euphemism masking his aloofness. He speaks only broken English, and he seems uneasy whenever he meets Mary's hopeful eyes. The flickering lamps cast their glow upon Mary's silk gown, each pleat testimony to meticulous preparation for a marriage of state. Yet in her heart, it felt like needles pricking her flesh. Mary at 38, experiencing love's hope for the first time, wondered, "Does my husband ever truly wish to draw close?" As Philip raised his hand in greeting to the guests. Mary suddenly noticed that he looked not at her face but around anxiously, as if maintaining a facade. Inside, Mary's heart recoiled. After so many days steering the nation's destiny, she understood at last that marriage with Philip offered no solace for her heart, only political expedience. Soon after the ceremony, Mary wandered alone along the palace's silent corridors. Night filtered through stained glass windows, painting pale, multicolored shards across the stone floor. Mary asked herself, how many oaths and rituals were performed just to leave me standing here so solitary? She glanced into a large hallway mirror and saw her reflection in all its finery, but with eyes hollow and bewildered, like a wanderer in her own life. On her first day as Philip's wife, Mary tried to preserve her dignity. She smiled at her husband, bowed to the Spanish nobles, then retreated to her private apartments. But every footstep on the scarlet carpet echoed like a lash in her soul, reminding her that even exalted rank was as fragile as a paper decree. In her chamber, Mary looked out toward the small rose garden where blossoms had withered. She wondered, does love fade like these petals? A breeze through the window brought the strange scent of foreign flora, reminding her of Philip's western homeland, a land Mary had never known, and deepening her sense of abandonment. Mary sat at her dressing table, peering into the small mirror at her weary face. She placed her hand gently on her wedding ring, its cold metal a clamp around her heart. Mary told herself, I have faced many storms. Why should my spirit falter before my husband's silence? She knew she must bridge the gap of language and emotion. Yet in that moment, she felt emptiness grow within. In the days that followed, Mary strove to maintain the ritual. She learned a few awkward Spanish phrases to speak with Philip, but he replied only in broken English, sometimes nodding curtly. Mary recalled the bright eyes of her people when she declared, I live and die for my subjects, and compared them to Philip's distant gaze, two worlds destined never to meet. One evening, Mary stood on the balcony watching the sun set behind Portsmouth's masts. In the pale pink light, she heard the waves' soft susurrus, as if the sea whispered, Freedom waits for you. Mary inhaled deeply, realizing that however rigid her marriage might be, she could still guard her heart with faith in herself. Gradually, Mary devised a psychological strategy. Rather than wait for Philip's affection, she would find fulfillment in advancing domestic policy. Letting her heart speak through just actions and unity, she began to preside over state councils, smiling at her ministers and projecting the image of an independent queen. Mary's mindset shifted from loneliness to enduring self-respect. She might lack marital love, but she could possess love for her country. Thus, the harshness of marriage did not destroy Mary. Instead, she transformed her personal tragedy into inner strength. She came to understand that the throne was not merely to be clutched, but to be lifted high by the power of her will. In the gilded palace, Mary Tudor, in her radiant wedding gown, broke into a determined smile. The final testament that though marriage might fade her hope of affection, she would keep the flame of justice ablaze within her heart. After 11 months of sharing bed and board, Mary believed that the miracle had ripened within her. A real fetus was growing beneath the thin silk of her garments. She imagined long nights cradling her belly, feeling every minute flutter as though it were the call of a new life ready to emerge. The palace, in turn, was lavishly adorned as if to welcome a coronation. The ceiling of the birthing chamber inlaid with glittering gems, the foot of the bed draped in vibrant red velvet, and delicate ivory silk curtains billowing in the artificially stirred breeze. Carpentry hands worked in solemn silence, fashioning each golden slat for the cradle of the future prince or princess. Seamstresses embroidered the tiniest motifs as though weaving hope itself into the plush velvet. Spanish trumpets sounded triumphant fanfares. Soldiers stood in formation applauding, and every sense of Mary's was swept away in boundless joy. Yet that faith withered before a cruel truth. The child never arrived. Mary's belly remained swollen, yet empty, her endless bouts of morning sickness leaving her paler than ever. Sometimes, despite her efforts to maintain regal composure, she was overcome by vomiting. Mary still clung to every imagined twinge in her womb, soothing herself with the notion that it was the movement of the developing child. She leaned against the balcony's balustrade, gazing out at the rose garden before the palace, whispering as if lullabying her unborn, "Stay with me, my dear." But only the wind answered, and the petals drifting down offered no reply. When the servants began to troop in with reports, "The Queen is unwell. She needs more time to regain her strength. Let us postpone the birth date by a few days," Mary realized she was trapped in an absurd play. The public announcement of her pregnancy, once repeated with unwavering conviction, had become a burden. The palace rang with the restrained laughter of guests, mingled with anxious whispers. Will the joyous event ever come? Each reassurance from the royal physicians that more time was needed or that a new remedy must be tried only deepened Mary's torment. For it kindled a doubt. Had Mother Nature herself betrayed her? Month after month passed, and each scheduled delivery date was continually postponed. A grandstand was erected in the royal courtyard to distribute gifts to the people, and blankets and bedding were prepared for the heir who would never arrive. Yet after the outward facade of celebration, Mary would quietly withdraw into her private chamber. Heavy velvet drapes shut out all light, leaving only a white-draped bed and a small velvet pillow where she lay night after night. She would close her eyes tight, concentrate on the imagined contractions, light a solitary candle, and softly sing her own lullaby, telling herself, "Just one cry, and everyone will believe." But the cry never came. The birthing room, once the most sacred place of familial happiness, was now marked only by a silent wall hung with tiny garments that would never be worn. The first golden cradle, a special gift from the 3 foremost nobles, stood forlorn in the corner, like a reminder of her obligation to the realm and of her personal agony. The scent of new fabric mingled with camphor oil in the air, yet her heart grew heavier with despair. Mary's psyche at this point resembled a shattered mirror. Each shard reflected a glimmer of hope, even as it revealed a deep crack of disappointment. Night after night, she gathered pieces of discarded swaddling cloth, placed them in a small tray, as though preserving memories of the child who would never come. She wondered, is it because I have yearned too fervently that this phantom pregnancy hides from me? Those questions found no answer, save for the wind's whispers through the window slits. Whenever she appeared before the court, Mary still maintained a dignified front. She sat upon the throne, one arm draped across her distended belly, forcing a smile. The courtiers exchanged quiet glances. The Queen seems fatigued. We must grant her more time. Their polite affirmations formed a barrier between Mary and the harsh reality. She herself felt it keenly. Though bearing the title of mother to the nation, she remained a great question mark. Then Mary began her journey to reclaim inner power. She set aside the tiny garments, locked the golden cradle away, and sealed the birthing chamber's door. She lit more candles on the wooden desk, retrieved the royal journal, and told herself, if the child does not come, I will give birth to another legacy. She recorded in detail each bout of nausea, each silent tear transforming her suffering into a unique historical testament. From the pain of her inability to bear a child, Mary redirected her longing into acts of public service. She issued decrees to care for widowed women, promoted family education, and expanded medical support for expectant mothers throughout England. Mary visited maternity hospitals, clasped the hands of real mothers, showed compassion, and shared experiences steeped in her tears. She used her personal ordeal as the foundation for humane policies, earning the admiration of both palace and populace. The palace began to echo, not with songs celebrating her unborn prince, but with praise for a benevolent queen. Mary understood that, even without a blood heir, she could bear profound changes in society. She gave a gentle smile when she heard children playing in the courtyard, envisioning their eyes alight with new hope. Finally, the day came when Mary emerged from the birthing chamber, not clutching a living child, but with steely resolve in her heart. She took the hands of her senior advisers and declared, "Though I cannot be a mother, I will be the mother of this nation." Applause thundered like a new anthem, not for the absent baby, but for a queen who had transformed her pain into strength. The nightmare called having a child had dissipated, giving way to an enduring passion for justice and compassion. When her dream of motherhood shattered, Mary fell into an irreparable crisis. Her soul, wounded so many times over, yearned for absolute justice, and she found that justice in punishing her enemies, the Protestant faithful whom she blamed for every calamity, from palace halls to village lanes. Whispers of a cleansing spread everywhere, and Mary, driven by hatred and an unshakable belief in her mission, launched the most brutal religious campaign England had ever seen. Though her authority had just been restored with the throne, Mary would not be content merely to rule. She issued a royal decree prosecuting heresy. Anyone whose baptism was deemed insufficiently sincere by Catholic rites would be branded a heretic. The Inquisition Council closed its sessions swiftly, operating like an inescapable machine. Former royal chaplains, priests with honeyed liturgical voices, and even humble peasants from nearby hamlets found themselves placed upon the ship of justice, only to be carried to the pyre of state-sanctioned flames. John Rogers, a compassionate pastor, was the first to feel the blade of so-called justice fall. Before a silent crowd, he was bound upright as the flames leapt toward his gentle face. His faint cry rang out like a death knell for what became known as the Moran persecutions. Mary, standing above on the tribunal's dais, looked into the dancing fire and saw her own anguish reflected there, the pain of her unrealized motherhood now erupting into a wave of religious vengeance. The ancient heresy laws, once dry text in dusty libraries, very reinstated under Mary's royal authority. There was no room for half measures. A single doubt about the sincerity of a prayer or the formality of a sacrament was condemned unequivocally as heresy. From judges to guards, every link in the bureaucratic execution chain functioned with ruthless precision, with official records, codified decrees, and marked lists of victims. Bonfires were kindled in town squares, where citizens could not turn away. The execution scaffold towered high, a scarlet banner bearing the cross flying above it. The condemned did not perish as mere statistics. They became living torches, the light of justice that Mary believed she had ignited. Every scream, every waft of ash, proclaimed her resolve. There would be no clemency for traitors to the faith. Those accused were offered the chance to recant and live, but when they hesitated and then refused, Muriel's red flag unfurled once more on the high platform, and the river of fire etched itself into every public square. Their steadfastness, "I will not betray my conscience," resounded like a final testament as they closed their eyes and embraced the flames. The torrent of crimson flame that swept across the land seared into the collective memory. Religion wielded this power to create hell even on their beloved soil. Yet Mary believed this was the only path to salvation for a dynasty that had fallen into schism. She remained within the palace walls, listening to the roar of flames and inhaling the scent of burning flesh seeping through half-open windows, murmuring prayers for the departed. Her psyche was fortified by the conviction that only extreme suffering could temper true faith and secure unbreakable authority. A queen whose hands were stained with ashes and embers. Yet in her heart, the fires of the Moran persecutions stood as proof that power must be defended by both faith and the sword. Mary's fanatical religious policies etched the name Bloody Mary into the annals of Europe, as thousands of fiery graves were raised by her hand. Each plume of smoke marked a personal tragedy, yet in Mary's eyes, it was the ultimate tool to save souls from the devils of heresy. Records show approximately 280 people were burned alive, an average of one person every 4 days each, scream echoing the grinding teeth of fear. The stench of burning flesh hung over every public square, prompting whispers among the populace to call her the Queen of Smoke and Fire. Every flame that flared served as an uncompromising warning. Mary's brand of justice was chiseled into chains and pyres. Yet each falling ash also planted seeds of hatred in the hearts of her subjects. They exchanged fearful glances. Elderly men trembled. Children huddled. And smiles faded from lips. Even Catholic lords who once pinned their hopes on her urged restraint, fretting for the stability of the realm. They reminded Mary that mercy was God's true virtue, and that a kingdom that burned its own would kindle the very inferno of hatred it sought to extinguish. But Mary, her mind aflame with zeal and underpinned by profound unease, refused to relent. She believed that each soul consumed by fire would be redeemed from eternal damnation. To her, the flames purified not only the flesh but also the sin. Clearing the way for divine light, she became the supreme judge, her steadfast gaze fixed on every bonfire, as if seeking humanity's salvation in their embers. Yet the cruelty exacted a terrible toll. Mary's reputation ceased to be that of the accomplished Tudor queen, and became the fearsome Bloody Mary, the woman who wielded ruthless retribution even against her co-religionists. Word of her conflagrations reached the French court and the German emperors, causing Europe's great powers to regard England with caution and distance. In the hearts of her people, Mary was no longer a symbol of religious unity but a living nightmare. They feared that a midnight summons might bring another blaze. In Mary's own heart, though she remained convinced she was right, doubt and hesitation began to creep in. On some nights, she would awaken with a start at the faintest echo from the palace, the flicker of flames. The curling shadow of a writhing figure burned into her mind. She wondered whether the road to salvation truly ran through a sea of fire, and whether the souls of the slain were indeed guided to heaven or tormented in an eternal nightmare. Still, Mary pressed on. She quashed voices of dissent in her court with fresh decrees, proclaiming that as long as a single soul strayed, as long as a single voice rejected the grace of Catholicism, she would keep the purifying flames alive. This relentless severity shifted her status from a ruler to a haunting spectre in English memory, the ash-streaked queen whose stern eyes glimmered amidst a sea of red fire. Finally, when Mary surveyed her reign through the shattered mirror of her victims' faces, she grasped the true cost of religious atrocity. It was not the salvation of souls, but a kingdom rent in two, its people scarred beyond repair. And the title Bloody Mary would remain a bitter reminder. Sometimes the very flames invoked to protect religious power kindle a living hell on earth. When the epithet Queen of Smoke and Fire was forever etched into history, Mary suffered an even harsher sentence. Her body began to rot from within. Blackened patches of necrosis spread across her flesh, swollen and numb as though scorched by flame. The untreatable dropsy made her appear pregnant for a third time, but this time no one believed in a miracle. They saw the ravages of a malignant tumor, perhaps ovarian cancer. The stench of decaying flesh permeated the palace, driving the ladies of the court to recoil in fear. The royal nurses, once devoted caretakers, now skirted her chambers in terror. In her delirium, Mary thought she heard the giggles of children in the corridors and glimpsed invisible, twinkling eyes in the shadows, souls that had never existed. Mere ghosts of dreams, shattered. Even the most trusted remedies failed her. Each acupuncture treatment drew agonized moans. Bloodletting left her weak as spun silk. Herbal potions and mercury pills only intensified her convulsions. Salty tears streamed down her velvet pillow day and night, mingling with the lingering scent of courtly perfumes to form the foulest odor imaginable. Philip II, her distant husband, never once came to her bedside. He sent brief well wishes via a messenger, then sought marriage with Mary's own half-sister, a move that once again drove a dagger through Mary's heart. She, who had once pledged her entire being to the crown, now lay alone upon her regal bed before a marriage that had already slipped into the past. At last, Mary Tudor drew her final breath in utter solitude. Without a sigh, she passed away quietly in a palace, heavy with the smell of ashes. Her body was hastily interred in a meagre ceremony. Initially, she was not laid to rest beside the mother she had longed to touch one last time. The hurried prayers felt incomplete, as though her farewell were half made. 44 years later, James I had Mary's tomb joined with that of Elizabeth, her half-sister, only to inscribe Elizabeth's name on the monument, an act drenched in political symbolism that relegated Mary to a shadow of sacrifice and betrayal. What remains of Mary Tudor's legacy is not grand monuments or sweeping reforms, but a tragic lesson in the price of fanatical power and ambition. She departed to the tolling of a solitary bell, leaving behind the figure of a deceived princess, Tiagelu Queen, and a decaying corpse lying alone upon the palace's cold stone floor. Mary endures not only as a symbol of religious atrocity, but also as a bitter emblem of betrayal, betrayed by her husband, her people, and, in the end, by her very own body, ravaged and hollow in its final nightmare. And so concludes the tragic story of Mary Tudor, from fragile princess to the infamous Bloody Mary. The woman who once sacrificed everything for power and faith ultimately had to face the very fires she ignited. History remembers Mary as a cautionary tale about the value of compassion and the dangers of fanaticism. Thank you for following this journey through blood and tears with us. Wishing you a peaceful night and sweet dreams, free from the haunting flames of the past. If you enjoy dramatic, emotionally rich historical videos like this one, don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next episodes. New stories, fresh perspectives, and the most in-depth analyses are waiting for you. We'll see you on our next adventure. And good night.